Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment, and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and for this episode I have the pleasure to be joined all the way from Canada, even though I can see the really nice beach background behind you, Jonathan. You're in Canada. I don't think that's the weather in there.
It isn't. We actually had snow just the other day, so.
I thought so. But thank you, Jonathan, so much for being here and for sharing this episode with me. And I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And for everyone that is here listening and watching us, can you tell us about who is Jonathan McLernon?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father. And, I actually think about the order in which I share about myself sort of determines what's most important to me. And so I've been married for 17 years and my wife is from Australia. So, and I actually have Kiwi heritage as well. So there's a connection there. Husband, father to a 13-month-old, which is one of the greatest joys in life, being a parent. And but to pay the bills, I'm a nutrition coach, and I focus on behavioral psychology. And but I've had a really crazy backstory. I've been a nanotech researcher. I've been a power line technician, a marine engineer in the Navy, a globetrotting English teacher. I ran a nutrition and supplement store. So there's a whole sort of eclectic collection of things I've done in my past. And I think it probably stems from I just have a very independent entrepreneurial type spirit. And I just couldn't stay in one thing for very long before I felt the need to try and go do something else, until it came to coaching and mentorship, where I really think I found my home.
Beautiful. And, it's really interesting. I was just literally before coming to this recording, I was talking with a client, and she was asking me a little bit more about my background. And I started to list a few of the things that I've done. And she's like, wow, you've done so many different things and you've been all of that. And I'm like, yeah, I've done a lot of different things, but that's not who I am. And it's really interesting, as you were just sharing about yourself. We have all of these different aspects of ourselves, things that we have done, things that we're doing, things that perhaps, as you're saying, like to pay the bills, like I did that. And there's all of these different aspects. And for me, the interesting thing with that a lot of times is, how do we define ourselves for ourselves and for others? Like what's the imprint that we are putting energetically into any room that we're walking into? What's the way that through different words people are going to perceive us, and to be able to understand that, I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, I would say that I'm a warm, huggable empath.
That's a nice one.
Which it's interesting because I think about my relationship just to how I perceive masculinity and to being male. And historically, I probably would have felt uncomfortable with who I am by nature. And my wife used to call me the Tin Man because I hid a lot of the emotions that I felt, because I felt shame around having these emotions. But being empathic means that obviously I'm quite in tune with other people's emotions and energies, and I feel things very deeply. And it was quite liberating when I came to the place where I realized that these emotions didn't diminish me as a masculine figure. I mean, I love being male. I love the feeling of being, kind of a protector and a provider and a father and a husband. Like I really enjoy those masculine roles, but I'm also just a very kind-hearted empath who wants to create positive change in the world. And, that's it. I no longer feel as though this somehow diminishes who I am as a man by being this gentle, caring person.
Definitely. And thank you for bringing that up. And it's something that I want to go a little bit deeper into later on during this episode, because it is so important, how we identify and what's, normal or what's something that is allowed to be within certain
Yeah.
constructs that we have. But before we get into that, would you mind sharing, Jonathan, a little bit around your journey and what led you
Yeah.
to actually be doing what you're doing now, especially around these topics that you're working
Yeah.
and sharing now?
So I'll probably start at, I'm 40, so I won't give you a year by year breakdown, but we'll jump ahead to about 29. And when my wife and I were traveling around the world and we were living in South Africa, that's where I went through a traumatic experience that really altered my course in life. And so I was attacked and nearly beaten to death. And obviously nothing really prepares us as human beings to go through this. And it was a very disconcerting experience. The men that did this, the men that attacked me, they didn't seem to have any qualms about the fact they were doing this. And I've done the work to move past that experience, but it was many, many years of work. So the fallout from that was really, I suffered from PTSD. I suffered from anxiety and depression. I became a binge eating food addict, and I gained over 120 pounds. And I didn't recognize who I was, and I didn't know what was happening in my head. And I really had no idea how to deal with this. So for many years, food became my source of escape, because I also really struggled to process emotions. But after going through something traumatic, there's a lot of big emotions, overwhelming emotions, and it's like it gets harder and harder to bury them and hide them. And so then it manifested in anxiety and panic episodes, which I look back and I view those as kind of like my nervous system pulling the fire alarm, saying, this needs your attention urgently. And it was, I remember about 2017, a doctor, he said to me, there's no pill that fixes this. You have to change how you're living. And that was kind of the start of maybe a different relationship with myself and with my body. And it was a couple of months after the doctor shared this that I ended up hiring a coach who I still thought I was hiring him because I wanted to lose weight and look like him. He had a really, impressive physique. So I thought that's what's going to make me happy, is to look like him, and maybe I'll stop hating myself. And instead, he worked with me in a very empathic way. So he worked with me, modeled compassion, taught me self-compassion. And we really explored a lot of conversations around self-love and self-compassion. And what does that mean? And even being comfortable with these concepts, because I realized, of course, looking back, I'd never had conversations with someone, or if I'd had any conversations around self-love as a man, it was probably joking, or it was probably derogatory. Because we were uncomfortable as masculine figures with this idea of what does self-love mean or look like. So that really altered sort of my course. And I had now gone this kind of journey of discovery. Well, who am I actually? I was motorcycle racing, powerlifting, heavy metal listening, pre-workout snorting, adrenaline junkie kind of thing. But it was all of this sort of almost hyper masculine behavior to compensate, because I wasn't comfortable with who I was, or who I am, I should say, being male.
It's no, I mean, there's so much there, and the experience of what you've been through, that it is the experience itself is really traumatic. And one of the things that, from what you were sharing, that I'm just assuming, so correct me if I'm wrong, and this is one of the biggest parts of trauma informed practices, that trauma is not only just the episode that happened, but how you're being able to process it, and how you're being able to actually integrate it and heal from it afterwards, whether that is by sharing it, by understanding it, by being able to communicate it, by seeing it from different lenses. And a lot of times, most of us grew up without the tools to be able to do that. And therefore, we end up going to different coping mechanisms depending on our own orientation or our family and cultural orientation. We end up going to one or another. And I was talking to one of my students from university yesterday during one of the classes afterwards, and she was telling me about her relationship with food as well. Like, that's her coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So this class I was touching on the topic of trauma, and it was the first time that she's put two and two together. The fact that most likely her coping mechanism and how much she's eating is actually based on trying to push down these feelings that she doesn't want to look. And so I was telling her, and of course, there's a lot of work that we need to do now, but I was telling her about that. Okay, like let's slowly start to look what you were saying, like being more compassionate and modeling that compassion so that she's able to not rely so much on that food from an emotional perspective, and start to look into that trauma, into those feelings, starting to integrate them, and then the relationship with the food will change by itself.
Yeah, it's, you've really touched on so many key parts of that, and it's as I changed, I really worked it in reverse, I guess, because I was trying to go from the outside in. I was trying to lose weight to learn to love and appreciate my body, and I really had to change that relationship, where when it started with loving and respecting and appreciating my body and working through the difficult experiences that I had, that I started to need food less. And I started to make peace with the emotions I felt. I started to try and develop a bit of emotional resilience, become comfortable with the difficult emotions that I was feeling. And it was an entirely different process than I thought I would be going through. But it's almost like we come to this place of, I think I was in this place of conscious incompetence. I was just aware that there was a gap. So I tried, for example, I tried dieting. I tried certain training regimens and working out and all these different methodologies, lots of supplements. And I could never seem to really achieve any sort of permanent results, because I really wasn't addressing what truly needed to be addressed within myself and within the human condition. And it took somebody else making me aware that this was the shortcoming that I was dealing with, in order for me to actually make peace with all of this and be able to move on with my life, and now be doing what I am doing.
Yes, really. I mean, really interesting. I have from my own path, when I was a late teenager, I went from being super active, like I was playing like sports every single day. I was doing taekwondo. I was doing all of this physical activity, and I was eating a lot. But because I was doing all of this physical activity, I was slim. And suddenly I got injured, and I wasn't able to do any physical activity. And I kept on eating the same. And suddenly my body is expanding, my face is getting chubbier.
Right.
And
yes.
And, like, and I didn't care so much from that standpoint, but I went to get a blood test, and my doctor told me that my cholesterol level was like really off the charts, and my sugar levels as well. And he said that that's from my family, like that comes
genetic predisposition.
Genetic, And I was like, oh, okay, so this is not good. What do I do? And then I went to my doctor, that she's a nutritionist, and she's quite holistic. And she told me, okay, let's not go into any diets. Let's actually look into certain different things to organize your habits around food now that you're not doing all of this exercise. And I literally changed 5 things. It wasn't like a hard diet or anything. It was to lower my cholesterol level. And that was the main thing. And in 2 weeks, not only I had dropped completely all of my levels, I lost 15 kilos, which I wasn't looking to lose them. But I lost 15 kilos. My body like changed shape, which is my shape now. And it was incredible for me how that change was so important, even more than like the dieting. And that was key in being able to see all of that. And I wonder, Jonathan, going back to what you shared earlier around the masculine, and around
Yeah.
being modeled what masculinity means, or being a male actually
Right.
means.
Yeah.
What was your understanding of what was being a man?
I think I probably the first person that really I understood masculinity from was my father. And I love my dad. I have a great relationship with him. He's a good man, but he also went through a really difficult childhood because his father, my grandfather, had been captured by the Germans in World War II as a prisoner of war, had PTSD and trauma, didn't know how to deal with it. And so he didn't know how to really show my dad love. He only knew how to criticize. So my dad really didn't understand what this looked like because it hadn't been modeled for him. He knew that there was a lack in his life and he wanted to do better, but there's only so much that can be done to sort of bridge that gap. And so I really saw him as like a strong, maybe stoic kind of figure. Like it wasn't that he was unloving, but he just struggled to show it and express it. And so I look at that and I never saw many emotions out of him other than anger, occasionally like laughter. And so that's sort of what I learned it to be was, men don't show emotions. We're strong in the face of struggle. We need to be sort of this way, protectors, providers, that sort of thing. And I don't see a problem with sort of these aspects other than sort of being uncomfortable with having emotions. But I imagine when he was a kid and had emotions, he was probably cuffed across the side of the head. And so that pattern kind of gets passed down. So in my understanding, really that sort of shaped, and then really society sort of had similar sort of things. Hey, boys don't cry. If you experience this, if you cry and you're male, like that's a problem. And so I just kind of learned to hide my emotions because I saw how I would be received. I would be seen as being weak or whatever, even though I'm like quite a large man physically, I would be seen as somehow being weak if I'd had these emotions. So I learned how to hide them. And so it's interesting. It took me until my late 30s before I really started to understand that it's possible to be a man and to be masculine and not shy away or hide from the emotions that I feel.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Of course, I have slightly different upbringing and different modeling. And at the same time, a lot of my culture has, in a sense, that like in South America,
Right.
the macho culture is which for me, a macho, like that image is a very toxic masculinity type of model. It's very, it's big in South America, yet at the same time, my father was showing me something slightly different. It wasn't completely different when I was a little kid, but he was much more open. And yes, I don't remember really when I was a kid seeing him cry or a few different things like that, but he was much more open, and we were encouraged all of the time, to express our emotions. And one of my things growing up was, and I was all of the time saying, I'm always like, I'm doing well, and my parents, both of them, would tell me, you're just swallowing down your emotions, like allow them.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. And it wasn't until I was a teenager that I learned how to feel my feelings, and I was like, oh yes, that's what I was doing. I was like, I was pushing down all of these feelings because I didn't want to see them. And in that moment, I didn't know anything different. And I think that in especially this past 5 years, I've been seeing how in society in general, there's this shift of what does masculinity mean? What is the role of men? Which masculinity and men are not the same thing. What's the role of women? What's the role of feminism? And what does being a female and a male actually mean? And how do we integrate the masculine aspects of us and the feminine aspects of us in our own being? And I know this, like for myself, I spend so much time working on this that for a lot of people, I bring a lot more of that feminine side than the
Yeah.
masculine side, just because of my approach to certain things. And not every, like, I think that, as you're saying, like, if we haven't learned that, if we will model something different, we don't know that that's possible. So
Right. Yeah.
how was it for you to be able to create this change and to be able to integrate this different way?
I think it was helpful that the man that was modeling this for me, the coach that I had at the time, was still like a strong masculine figure. So he developed his physical strength through training. He was a father to two boys, and so I think that was a really nice way to bridge the gap. In that I saw that, again, that it didn't take away or it didn't detract from him as a man, as a male figure, like having these these emotions and whatnot. He was still able to be sort of a strong, capable man, and I think I needed to see something like that to go, this is okay, this is safe. And it was kind of now I'm comfortable with who I am. I don't I don't feel any need to hold back or hide it. But I needed to see that. And I think maybe that's how our brains work in a sense. Being vulnerable, biologically it represents a risk. And so our primal brain is really trying to protect us from being exposed like this. And I think this is why coaching is one of the reasons why coaching is still a thing in the age of information, that we really need to be connected to another human being who essentially has our back, where it's safe to be vulnerable. It's safe to go through the process of change and transformation. And we need this, I think, collectively as human beings. We need a connection to other people who have us. And we get to fill that role sometimes too. And it's like, this is the role that I fill as a coach very often for people, is I'm the one that, metaphorically has their back. I'm there to protect them and whatnot, to allow them to be vulnerable in the process of change and transformation.
Definitely. And, like me having been in both roles of like someone with a mentor and a coach, and also being a guide or a coach, the importance of connection and the importance of creating a container that is a safe space, because a lot of times, of course, depending on our life experiences, there's some deep stuff that can happen. So like someone that doesn't feel safe is not going to open up, it's not going to share, it's not going to be vulnerable.
Yes,
because
absolutely,
as you're saying, like, we don't feel safe. So it's that understanding that our body is always trying, both mind and body are trying to protect us all of the time to survive. And that, like, sometimes it's not the most beneficial way or the way that serves us the most, but it's a mechanism that is there to protect us. So being able to find that is so important. And I wonder, Jonathan, as you're working with this coach and as you're doing this work on yourself, how did you start to see that all of that inner work and inner mental work as well started to shift your experience in both with, as you were saying, with your food, with your self-image? You said, like, now I'm confident in, like, in this. What was that, like, process like on an external perspective?
I think I had to, like, the first time I told my story publicly about like what had happened to me, people had heard about it privately and whatnot, and I guess gossip travels and things. So there were obviously people in my circle who knew what had happened. But when I really talked publicly about my mental health struggles and what the real ramification is, instead of just brushing over it and being like, I made it through this and I'm strong and so on and so forth, my anticipation was that I was going to be mocked or rejected or seen as weak and all of this. And of course, that wasn't the reality. When I shared my story, the outpouring that came forward from it, the willingness to be vulnerable and share, other people were willing to say, one, we're inspired by your courage in sharing this, but it also makes us feel like we can do this too. And so it was like I had to step into these uncomfortable places and kind of take a risk in a sense, because I suppose, depending on who I was connected to, that could have happened, but it was, in my head, it was a much bigger risk. And once that had happened, I realized, okay, there's a freedom in just being authentic, in being who I am and not feeling as though because I felt because let's say I don't have a fitness model physique, and I work in the world of weight loss and transformation in a sense. And so I felt as though because I didn't have a fitness model physique, even though I'd lost a lot of weight, that I couldn't compete with all of these aesthetically, attractive individuals. But what that proved to me was it wasn't really about that. And for the people that I work with, it's not really about that. They'll say things like, yeah, it'd be kind of nice to look like that, but it's not really their priority. Their priority is being able to live life more vibrantly and more freely. So piece by piece, bit by bit over time, I would just take forward steps into this sort of uncomfortable space where I'm like, I don't know how this is going to get received, but I'm going to try it and see what happens. And each time that happened, and the worst case scenario that I had planned for in my head, when that didn't come to fruition, that kind of gave me courage to keep trying to take these forward steps. And that's not to say that I haven't sort of like lost people along the way because of who I'm becoming, but if they're uncomfortable with the person that I'm becoming, I don't hold it against them for choosing to take a different path.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because I usually say to everyone that I work with, it takes a lot of courage to do our own personal work, where we want to call it spiritual, inner work, personal work, however we want to call it. It takes courage to take self-responsibility and to be able to change and transform, because with that transformation, there's a lot of transformation around us. So I lost friends, I lost a lot of relationships just because we were going in different directions. And it's not like I lost them, like a fight or anything. It's just like,
sure, yeah,
we stopped actually hanging out. We stopped being friends because we were just interested in different things and we were going on a different path. And we are usually so comfortable with what is known and with the comfort of our group of friends, our family, our work, and this and that, that to create those changes, it takes a lot of courage.
It does. Yeah.
So it's something, as you're saying, like we need to be also prepared for what's going to happen.
Yeah. And not necessarily see it as a negative thing. I think of it like a number of people that are, if I was to bump into them, I'm sure we'd have a good conversation because we have a shared connection from years past. And so, hey, how are you doing? What's happening in your life and so on. But we would probably just drift apart again because we have different views, different perspectives, just different paths in life. And I think just even seeing that as a natural progression of life and being comfortable with that by choosing this, ultimately though, like there are certain people that come into my life and that are staying in my life that are like with me as a part of my life because of who I am, because of who I'm becoming. And so there's something also really beautiful about that. And we could just call it, we want to call it finding your tribe or something like that, however we might express it. But just this idea that there is such freedom in being authentically who we are. And I share that. And I think sometimes maybe we misunderstand that because or some people do. I mean, because I hear people sort of authentically being jerks. If I could just, I'll be polite about it. But, and, oh, that's just who I am, and it's like, well, being authentic isn't necessarily a license to mistreat other human beings in the name of sort of being authentically yourself. But I think it's really becoming comfortable with our own flawed human experience, where we come face to face with our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, and the things that are less than perfect, and we start to become okay with them, and we're okay with the world seeing them. And in that, because I think about one of my experiences was I lost everything in business, in one of my businesses, lost all of my money, lost all of it, just left a mountain of debt. And it's kind of an interesting, almost like a metaphor that happened in real life. Everything was taken away from me, but I was kind of trapped in this business. I was trapped in this relationship. I was holding on to it, holding on to some kind of hope that maybe this wasn't going to go the way that I kind of sensed it was going. But once it was all ripped away, it's like there's nothing more I could do other than just maybe grieve the loss and now move forward and do something else in my life. And I wouldn't be doing what I am today had that not been taken away from me.
Interesting. That a lot of times, one of the things that I try to instill with a lot of people that I work with, especially the ones that I haven't yet worked one-on-one with or more in depth with, is, and of course, we all need our own path, it's telling them, don't wait until you hit rock bottom. Don't wait until that moment, even though those are moments that enable a lot of us to create the big changes, because like that, that's it, you hit rock bottom. Now you need to completely change direction and all of that, and it's an amazing opportunity. And at the same time, what I say is, you start changing before that happens. Like like for me, it's the same as with medicine. I'm much more of a proponent of preventative medicine than like something happening and then having to like do something, whether that is holistically, allopathically, or whatever. It's about understanding, like, do I want to hit rock bottom, or can I understand, like, oh, I have all of these things that I need to look into, and I can start changing before that happens. And and if like if someone's path is to hit rock bottom, that's going to happen either way.
Right. I agree with that. I think sometimes maybe this is part of what we do even as coaches. It's not that we are perfect in any sense of the word. I really try to make it clear that I am not, that I am also on a journey of growth and development. And maybe I'm a little bit further down a road that somebody else would like to travel. And I have the benefit. I can't change my past with hindsight, but I can use my hindsight to help another person maybe not fall off a cliff. It's still going to be hard and uncomfortable, and you might fall and scrape your knee or twist your ankle or something like that, but you're not going to fall off a cliff. And that's, I think, where coaching and mentorship, and like, we're wired for human connection. I think this is historically how human beings learned, is through community and connection and mentorship and connection to elders and wisdom and things like that. And we kind of, I think, lost that along the way. But there does seem to be this sort of awakening, this desire to reconnect, because we are, the age of digital technologies is opening our minds up to, oh my gosh, there is a lot of terrible things happening in the world, and we don't like this, so we have to go about this in a different way. And I like this idea of expansive change. We might look at the magnitude of a problem and go, that's way bigger than me. For example, I recently interviewed a gentleman who works in the prevention of child sex trafficking. That's, to me, feels like that would be a horrific thing to do, to come face to face with. And he said, there's 45 million people being bought and sold in slavery today, more than ever in human history. And to try to come face to face with that number, we hear events like the Holocaust, which is a horrific event in human history. And this is dwarfing that in terms of the number of lives that are being destroyed. And as one person, it would seem like it's way beyond me to be able to do, but it's like, well, let's look at this in a different way. Could your actions maybe help one person, so one less life caught in slavery? And it doesn't even have to be direct action. Could it be just supporting somebody who works in this field, and so on? So it was a really interesting, and I think it's this idea that when faced with a monumental problem or challenge, we don't have to try to come up with a solution of equal magnitude. And there's actually, and that in itself is even liberating.
Yes, and as you were sharing that, something popped into my mind from a conversation that I had with during one of the events that I was running. It was all about using money for having a positive impact. And this person that was one of the guest speakers, he's the CEO of an investment asset company here in New Zealand that their focus is on positive impact. And they have done so much research on making sure that all of the companies that they are investing in, they are not supporting different things like the child trafficking or the slave trade or unpaid slave, modern slavery treatment, unethical practices, all of these different values that they had. They made sure that not only the company wasn't supporting that, but on their supply chain, that wasn't there. Of course, as well, they were focusing on, renewable energy and plant-based food and a lot of new things that are out there. and he was saying something that, based on what you're saying, he was saying, you don't need to tackle this. He was talking to the audience. You don't need to tackle this. You just need to not invest your money with the people that are putting money in that. So if you invest with us, and he wasn't saying invest just in us, like
Sure,
he was saying, like, if you actually are investing and you don't know where that money is going, you might be supporting something that you're against. So just by becoming aware of where you're investing your money, you might actually create already change, as you're saying. And that's something, you know, like, it's not daunting, it's not huge, it's a small change that we can use to vote with our dollars for what we want to see in the world.
Even simply from a consumer standpoint, you know, as you're describing this, I think investment, yes, maybe it's more impactful, but even just thinking about where do we spend our money. And so I find myself drawn to what we call the ethical omnivore movement. So I'm comfortable with the consumption of animals. I believe it's been a part of human history since we've walked this earth. What I don't like is animal husbandry, modern animal husbandry practices where we don't honor and respect the animal that gives their life, that our life would continue. Because I sort of have a cycle or circle of life view on things, but and so we like the idea that we can go to a farm here locally where they raise their animals in a humane fashion. The animals have a good life. They live life as it was intended for that animal. And then when it comes time for slaughter, that we consume all parts of the animal, not just the parts that we find, you know, most desirable. And so, you know, liver is the one that I have a bit of a hard time with, but really this idea of becoming a conscious consumer. So what am I choosing to consume? What am I choosing to spend my dollars on? What am I supporting with those dollars? Because whether it's investing or spending, it's really, you know, I just find myself wanting to support companies that do really simple things. The company that makes, I think they're called True Earth, for example, and they make these little laundry sheets instead of making big bottles of laundry liquid that have the same effect. Or a company that makes like toothpaste tablets and they go in a glass jar instead of like plastic tubes of toothpaste and so on. So just little decisions, because if I tried to overhaul my entire life all at once, I'd just be overwhelmed and run away screaming. But I just keep making these little subtle shifts in my consumption patterns and become just a little bit more conscious every day in terms of how I choose to consume. And I think that's when we approach it from that perspective, it becomes much more manageable. And I think we underestimate, because we underestimate the magnitude of one person's actions. We significantly underestimate the cumulative effect of those actions.
Yes, definitely. And like what you say is at the core of what I share with conscious action, like those individual actions that through the collective, they get compounded. And whether, as you're saying correctly, whether that is with investing or with spending money every single day on all of the things that we do, choosing consciously based on our own values. Like when you're saying your value is a different value than me, therefore I choose to eat a plant-based diet and I'm vegan.
Yeah.
And I'm perfectly okay with those that are not that. What I'm always encouraging people is to look at what they stand for, to look at what their values are, and to support that instead of supporting something unconsciously that is not what is aligned with themselves. And that, I think that as a practice, to be able to go and to look into what do I actually care about, what are my values, and where can I get that? As you're saying, like I also buy, for example, like the toothpaste tablets. It's like, well, like I care about, you know, like the impact of single-use plastics. So I don't use single-use plastics. I understand the impact of buying packaged things because a lot of it goes to landfill. I don't buy anything that would end up going to landfill. Everybody choosing their own lane based on what they care about. And I think that is part of the human experience from my side, in terms of I'm not trying to force anything into anyone. And I'm perfectly okay having a conversation like we're having now. I'm with you saying something that is different than my belief in terms of, you know, like the eating animals. And I'm okay with the fact that that's your belief, that's your values, and that even within that, you're doing something that for you is more conscious than someone that perhaps is eating meat and doesn't even have that other aspect into it.
Yeah. And I don't yet have this freedom, but it would be quite something, I think, actually to be able to hunt and take it a step further. That would be really cool to be able to do that, because it feels like there's a closer connection to the planet in the way that we used to exist. And it's interesting how it feels like we're sort of coming full circle as human beings. We speak about maybe collective consciousness, where we're becoming more and more aware of like how connected we actually are. There's a lot of us on the planet. We span the globe, but we're very, very connected. And it's shifting how we choose to behave. And we're almost going through this like moment of reckoning where for example, where we're uncovering that, capitalism and all of its promises. It's funny. I recently interviewed someone who is a communist, and they hold a different position politically than I do, in a sense. But I was interested in hearing their perspective and how did you get to this place? Because our common ground was we both look at, let's say, the capitalist consumption-based economy, and we go, there's a real problem here. We are like basically extracting as much as we can from the earth and from human beings in the name of enriching specific shareholders and the massive wealth and power and money at the expense of the planet we live on and 99.9% of the world's population. And so by having these different perspectives, but having these conversations, we go, well, collectively, even from these different perspectives, we have very, very similar aligned goals. And can we find those common and those shared values and work from that place instead of this place of, you're a bad person because you do this, or you're a bad person. Let's find the common ground first and say, can we work together towards these shared values that we hold?
And that comes, for me, that comes from a place of openness, because we place so much on holding our positions and on judging something that we learned as a label. Like, most people, for example, in the Western capitalist world, they hear the word communism, and it's like, no.
Yeah,
like,
run away, this is terrible.
Yeah, instead of actually being able to hold the conversation and to be able to unpack, understanding how there's so many more similarities in our perspectives and in how we experience our human life than differences. And it's because we are just staying on that superficial level that we don't understand it yet with a lot of it. And I think that the more that there's this change of consciousness and as you're saying, like this shift that is happening, there's for me, going back to more simple ways, going back to the slowing down and to reconnecting to ourselves, to others, to our environment. And by doing that, then our behavior will follow and change. So it is, it might be like that, or it might take hundreds of years. I don't know. But I think that it's a direction that I see that we're going. And at the same time, of course, that happens, that means that we will shine a light on all of the things that are wrong, and that is not going to be easy to look at. And a lot of the things that have been shoved under the rug, they're going to come out, and that's going to be hard. And we're already seeing that in these last few years with a lot of things happening in the world. And the interesting for me with that is, it's not that that's new, it's just been hidden. So how do we deal with the fact that now it's there, as you were saying, now we have all of this information, now it's there. What do we do with that?
And it's funny because I go back to this conversation I had with a gentleman involved in fighting child sex trafficking. And he said, the reality is, if you're turning a blind eye, you're complicit. And he said, it sounds harsh to put it that way, but, and more importantly, he said, men are 99% of the traffickers and like 99% of the purchasers, and young girls are, 99% of the victims. Not exactly those stats. I shouldn't, but that's essentially what the ratio looks like. And so he says, men, if you are turning a blind eye to the fact this is happening, whether or not, and ignoring it will not make it go away. And so turning a blind eye to these atrocities that are taking place means that you are complicit. It doesn't mean that, hey, well, I'm not doing it, so I'm okay. It's still happening.
Yeah.
And that's an uncomfortable reckoning to come to this place where you go, if I'm trying to turn a blind eye and saying not in my backyard, whatever the challenge might be, that ultimately I'm complicit in it because I'm not actively being a contributor to positive change.
Yes, and like in the last few years, I've seen this a lot with the entire Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and being able to understand, my position, even though if I don't do any of the things, and like even if I would think I'm not racist, even if I'm thinking I'm not anti-feminist, it's about creating space and to be able to listen and to be able to give a voice, to be actively engaged in that, to understand, yes, as you're saying, like I might not be like the one doing that, but I play a role in this collective. So what's my role in it? And Jonathan, as we're coming towards the end of this episode, I just have a question for you that might be a really big question, not an
I
easy
like big
one.
questions.
and that is, what is the one thing you wish everyone in the world knew?
That conscious awareness, and I would say compassionate conscious awareness, is the space where we create change. But to step into that space is going to be uncomfortable. If we just let go of this idea that somehow there's an easy life out there, there isn't. Human life isn't really life without struggle. We're born in struggle. I watch my wife give birth. It's like humans are brought into this life through struggle. It's not that we seek out struggle. It's not that we make our lives harder than necessary, but when we come to peace with the fact that inevitably we're going to encounter struggle, but that's where growth lies. And so this place of compassionate conscious awareness is where this begins. And compassion allows us to see our weaknesses, our flaws, our struggles, our failures, really our humanity, without the lens of judgment, but with a desire to understand.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And as we come towards an end, Jonathan, where can people find you if they resonate with your message, if they resonate with what you're sharing and potentially want to check out what you do to work with you?
Yeah. If you're interested in the nutrition realm, it's freedomnutritioncoach.com. If you're interested in how I teach people how to build online businesses, Jon McLernon.com, and we can put the links in the show notes. And then I have two podcasts. One is called Between the Before and After, so telling people stories about overcoming difficult obstacles in their life or living with difficult obstacles in their life. The other is called It's Not So Black and White, and that's really about having civil, nuanced discussions around difficult topics where we might even disagree. And so I would say those are the best places to find me.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And as you say, we'll have the links on the show notes so that everybody can find it easily. So for everybody listening, let us know what resonated with you, what was interesting about this episode. Put it on the comments so that we know and we can keep on being engaged in this conversation, because it is a conversation. It's not us just talking and you listening. We want you to be involved. So just leave us a comment, whatever it is that you're finding this episode. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for taking the time and for sharing in this open conversation, and for everything that you're doing. And I do hope that people go and continue to listen, because there's so many important things that you touched on during this conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for holding this space.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.